I'm one of the horror studies colleagues at Northumbria University, and I'm just going to talk a little bit in my dulcet Geordie tones about the film XTRO that we're all going to watch this evening. So I always get the chance to talk about British film. I'm a massive British film enthusiast, whether it be Ealing comedies or the iconic Gothic romances of Hammer films or the experimental work of Derek Jarman. And XTRO, of course, a film in which a woman gives birth to a fully grown man who then proceeds to cut the cord with his own teeth. It really is something to behold. How many people have seen the film? Yeah? Great. For those of you who haven't, you are in for a treat. I absolutely love it, and I'm sure by the end of this evening you will too. The film's an odd one, I think it's fair to say. It's a science fiction horror film. Yes, it's about a blood-hungry alien, but Ridley Scott's Alien, this ain't. It isn't a film that's easily pigeonholed and doesn't, by my reckoning at least, fit neatly with any horror cycle of the 1980s, really. Some people compare it to the film Phantasm. It's not really like Phantasm, but it's similar insofar as that. Whereas, for those of you who've seen Phantasm, you'll know that, when people talk about 70s horror cinema, they're often talking about Halloween or whatever. Films which are quite easily grouped together. You can't really do that with Phantasm, and you can't really do that with XTRO either. One is pushed to find any coverage of it at all in the mighty tomes of British cinema history. And in fact, beyond a couple of amateur historians, whose work is great, by the way, the idea that there is anything worth saying about British horror cinema from this period is a view seldom shared. Of course, there are implicit reasons for this. The 80s were, after all, the era of Jarman, of Stephen Frears, of Loach, Lee, Merchant Ivory, and various film workshops. But it was also a period that saw a plethora of independent horror films emerge, the majority of which were made with an eye on international markets and were produced to meet the demand of, for grisly horror films during the nascent home video eras. Films like Don't Open Till Christmas. No? Yeah? I think that's worthy of a cheer. I mean, I could be wrong, but if anybody's going to cheer, it's this audience. So let's do that again, shall we? Don't Open Till Christmas. Yes. Slaughter High. Yeah. Michael J. Murphy's Invitation to Hell. Yeah. 45 minutes of pure delight, that film. And XTRO is another one. So the film was shot in and around London for around £500,000, directed by a man with the most British-sounding name in the world, Harry Bromley Davenport. But interestingly, and this is what I think is super interesting about XTRO, yes, but also British horror during this period, is that half of its investment came from an American by the name of Robert Shea, or Bob Shea, who of course was the founder of New Line Cinema, who would go on to produce A Nightmare on Elm Street, etc., etc., etc. And XTRO is not quite the only film that Shea made prior to Nightmare on Elm Street during this period, but it's a significant one insofar as that it played very well in the US, far better than it played in the UK, and sort of gave Shea, I suppose, a firm footing in the horror genre through which to exploit A Nightmare on Elm Street. But anyway, the film is best known, as I'm sure many of you know, for being featured briefly in the discourse surrounding the British video nasties. And whereas it wasn't banned, I think the fact that it was even part of that discourse and included briefly on the DPP's list is, it's the reason, I think, or one of the reasons why we remember it today. And it's fair to say that the film embodies much of what troubled so many people about horror films on video at that time. So yeah, it's gory, it's grisly, pregnant, man being birthed, and etc., 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 all that stuff. But it was also distributed by an established and respected company, Polygram, proving to the moral busybodies that the threat of violent videos was not simply contained to fly-by-night independents like Go Video, who put out Cannibal Holocaust and so on. no, the threat of video nasties was disease-like and could contaminate anyone or any organisation, anything. It was released into British cinemas too, and despite some good business predictions, it failed to connect with the British public of the 1980s, the idiots. You know, it failed to connect in any meaningful way, and as a consequence, it didn't play for very long. So, for example, for 1 week in June 1983, as the Playhouse on Westover Road in, yes, Bournemouth, was screening some obscure children's film called E.T. the Extraterrestrial, a short walk away on Hinton Road, the ABC One was screening XTRO, tellingly promoted under the strapline, as I'm sure you've seen in the poster outside. Not all extraterrestrials are friendly. And in fact, it's worth saying that XTRO was originally written as Monstro, which I think we can agree is a pretty dreadful title, and then retitled XTRO to capitalise precisely on the notion of the extraterrestrial. Now, of course, more worryingly, and despite the proficiency of the special effects team, the monster in XTRO was not in any way the scariest alien being threatening British film and video in the 1980s. That was, of course, Mary Whitehouse, who, unfortunately for us, wasn't only a movie, but XTRO is, and it's very much deserving of our attention. I love it. I hope you love it. Enjoy the film, everyone. Thank you very much.